Okay. Okay. Perfect.
I think we'll wait for a couple of minutes before we start off. If that is fine, I think
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
all
fine.
good.
That's fine. Perfectly okay. I just landed from Mumbai, in fact. So, my flight was a bit delayed. So I just got in. Luckily, I made it on time.
Oh, lovely. As I hope you made it on time for the festivities as well. I'm sure. I was just trying to.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm from the south. I'm from Bangalore and Hyderabad. So
Oh, okay.
here yeah, it's more of my extended family and stuff over here. So,
I see. That sounds great. Yeah, many of the people I'm sure who may be joining from India may be busy with the festivities, perhaps.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Wonderful.
did you have a chance to go through the speaker notes as well?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
That's why I had shared some of the thoughts.
Correct, correct,
Broadly.
correct, correct.
Yeah.
So many places, what I've done, for example, when we were talking about latency and all that, I have put it in words itself below so that
Yeah.
they understand what we mean. Though I have given the examples of trauma ward, for example, if it's going to be an ER, we don't want a very high latency in the ER. It has to be very, very quick. So those operational constraints, if you're able to give to the engineering team at the beginning itself, okay, whatever you build, it has to be within these boundaries. So that makes sense. So let me
Right.
see. I think also the material when I went through it, I realized there may be quite a lot of it. So which is why I was hoping that many of these topics have already been covered in the preceding sections. So that way, at least it's more of a refresher than having to learn everything all at once. Yeah. Hi, Dhiren.
Absolutely. Oh, wonderful. So we are all set.
Wonderful.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so maybe perhaps exact 7 p.m. And I think we can, on this very positive note, we can start off this discussion. Excellent. So we see the audience are keeping on joining in, but I'm sure people are going to continue joining, and we have people mostly who join on live on YouTube. So thanks everyone. The good opportunity about the people who have joined in as attendees would be that you can put your questions in the chat box, and we'll be happy to take it up during the discussion round. So that's a very quick housekeeping update. But with that, I think I am quite set to start off today's discussion and today's wonderful session. And it's just a privilege because this session in particular is the last session of this series until we come up with next one for sure. But for now, this is what we have been doing over every month, and there are people who have joined from different countries, India including, people working joining from different fields, from different generations as well, be it from the Gen Z generation to the millennials to the seniors. Many people have been joining in. So that's a wonderful engagement that we have had. Some workshops you have been a part of, some of the conferences that we have hosted in the past. Thank you so much for all your engagement and solidarity and teamwork. Certainly, the topic itself is AI for doctors, and certainly the AI itself is one of the most booming topic and the top skill in 2026. So with that, I think what we are at as of today is at one of the last sessions for this webinar series. This is the last session of this series, but this is series 1.0. So we will be having a 2.0 as well soon. So with that, we believe that today's discussion is going to be more towards focusing on how do we really take the entire discussions that we had throughout the entire year to a logical initial conclusion, I would say, before we embark on a larger journey together. So why are we attending today's session? First of all, is just to understand if you are a clinician, a medical student, you are a doctor, you are a professional, you are a senior consultant, regardless of it, or you are a tech person as well from the engineering side or an engineering student, and so on. How do we bring together the clinical practice and the healthcare innovation to explore what it really takes to move an idea that you have in your mind from the hospital ward to a scalable clinical solution? And MAMC MIC has been based on the same principle that we wanted to have an innovation center within a government medical institute, and one of the most prestigious institute of India. And the intent was same, that we have to see from the problem statement point of view, what are the things that we are thinking of, and how do we convert that into whatever jargons are going on in the world, in the artificial intelligence space. So this session will actually offer direct brass tacks guidance for clinicians or people who are looking to identify the workflows, the broken workflows, and building meaningful solutions, not only to just make it as a random isolated solution just because someone felt this is an interesting thing to make and we make it, but actually to see how do we navigate the Indian medtech ecosystem overall itself. So broadly, what do we expect from this session is that understanding how doctors can identify, or how any healthcare professional for that matter, identify real clinical problems and broken workflows that are worth solving with artificial intelligence, and also to gain actionable insights for this doctor innovator engineer collaboration, what to do when you have an idea, where to start, and how do you move from just an observation, a daily day-to-day problem, to a scalable innovation solution. And also to understand and navigate the current ecosystem, because we may think of so many beautiful ideas, but how do we make it as a reality is something which is imperative to understand. And it's a privilege actually to discuss this along with separate considerations, let's say having validation, how do we ensure that whatever risks that we are discussing about, how do we mitigate that, and things about responsible deployment of clinical AI. Now, all these topics are very dense, if I must say. So, we will try our best to cover as much as possible in this 1 hour session. But certainly, we have our privilege because we have Dr. Kiran Melkote with us, who is a VP at Avinya Strategies. And he's also the director of Moonshot Advisory. And all in all, it's very interesting because he's going to share his brief journey, but actually, he's indeed also an orthopedic surgeon, but also over here working in the artificial intelligence space, which is a very fascinating journey to look forward to hear about. And that's why the topic itself, from ward rounds to workflow, building, regulating, and scaling clinical artificial intelligence in India. And I think we have the best person over here on the call with us who has seen the journey from both sides, and he has been working in this ecosystem, building that ecosystem, I must say. And also in the other side, he has been in that clinical space for quite some time. So it's our privilege. Thank you so much, Dr. Kiran, for joining us. And I won't take much time, but just a one small housekeeping update. We will share a pre-test, which is a usual thing that we do for every session, and the link will be shared by one of our colleagues in the chat box. Please do fill that right away, so that we can keep a track of it. It will be helpful for us to um, for just understanding your engagement, and also for the certification purposes, whoever is participating in this session. So with that, welcome everyone. We have a wonderful group of attendees on Zoom, and we have wonderful people joining on YouTube as well. Thank you so much, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Kiran for taking it over. Dr. Kiran, over to you. Stage is yours.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those kind words, Dr. Priyansh. So, hi everybody. My name is Dr. Kiran Melkote. I'm from Avinya Strategies, and it's an honor to deliver this talk on AI for healthcare. So, I'll go very, very quickly through my journey. So, I have been a doctor for about 20 years now. I've been actively practicing. I just quit my job last year, so I am no longer in patient care delivery. I did an MBA from ISB, and now I've set up a healthcare focused venture. So this is called Avinya Strategies. We are based out of IIM Mumbai, and we basically handhold and help founders and startups building in the healthcare and life science space. So we take them from zero to one, and we give them all the support that usual sort of a venture studio would provide. But this is flavored towards healthcare because we have about 7 doctors like me. All of them are with an average experience of 15 plus years, various specialties. We also have some scientists, we have some finance experts, lawyers, etc. So the idea of putting this together was that we didn't have any such team which would go and work with the builders in the trenches. And that's where the gaps are, because most of the products that we would see coming out wouldn't have a market, wouldn't have a use case, wouldn't fit into our workflows, and to solve. So I think, sort of in the interest of time, we'll jump right in to the topic. It's a vast topic. It's supposed to be an overview of the entire journey. So let's start off. So if you look at it, the first and foremost step, how do you identify a clinical problem? So there are a series of questions that one must ask themselves. Okay, so you found a problem. Now what? Is the problem really a problem or it's just a minor irritant? So is it a problem all the time? Or is it only a seasonal spike? For example, if you look at the pandemic, it was basically the edge case of all edge cases, right? It was only for a short time. I mean, it had a very, very large impact on all of us. But solving for the pandemic may require a different kind of a mindset. That's what I'm trying to say. And is it a problem for everyone, or is it just because our hospital has a particular software or a particular workflow? And is it worth fixing? What is the impact that we expect this to have, either on patient care, either on hospital economics? So, is it worth fixing? And finally, the most important question that we should ask ourselves constantly: will anyone pay for fixing it? Is it enough of a problem that somebody will pay to have it fixed? So let's start with an example. So this is a common problem across hospitals, not just in India, by the way. Chronic delays in discharge. So we have normalized this to a large extent, right? And it doesn't shock us that it takes 6 to 8 discharge a day. But however, during an IT outage, for example, suddenly the discharge time has now shot up to 12 hours or more. So what do we do? Do we solve for the IT outage or do we solve for the broken discharge process or both? So that is what we actually need to look at. And how do we decide? So there, to sort of uh, go into the depth of this, to understand this, we need to borrow a concept from process management and statistics. So we call this as a type 1 error or a type 2 error. So type 1 error very simply is we mistake a temporary external shock for a usual or a systemic problem. And we try to change the system. It's build a permanent for a type 1 error. It's a massive waste of resources. A type 2 error, on the other hand, is basically a chronic workflow bottleneck. That is, the system itself is broken. And there it warrants some kind of a solution to fix it. And here it is quite important to recognize that this is a type 2 error because often we have grown numb to it and we accept that inefficiency as the unavoidable background noise of practicing medicine. So, learning how to distinguish between these two will help to find the actual signal. And now, again, there's a caveat here. Like I said earlier, if some founder decides to build for an external shock like the pandemic, which is worth doing, right? Many people are working on pandemic preparedness. But then you have to realize whatever solution you build must have a dual use mandate. If you make something which is to be dusted off and used only during an emergency, what will happen is two things. One is people will not know how to use it because they have not been used to it in their regular workflows. And second, it's a waste of resources because nobody's going to pay for something and spend a large amount of money on something which is only having occasional use. So if you're building for a type 1 error, it should have a dual use. It should solve both the problems. So I do realize that many of these words may be unfamiliar, but we can always answer these in the questions later on. So moving forward, now we have identified that this is a type 2 error. We still need more data. So reaching out to our peers from other hospitals or maybe other regions, looking at the literature on this particular problem and looking at the current workarounds. See, remember, we are in India, the land of Jugaad, right? If there's a problem, somebody has already found some kind of a solution. So when you look at the problem, you also need to look at what is the way out that people are currently using. And when you try to make a solution, that would be your benchmark. Is it as good as the workaround? Is it better? Does it do those things better? Does it actually use a completely new way? And most important, see, if you actually remember the previous slide, when you talk to your peers from other regions, when you talk to your doctors from other hospitals, when you look at the literature, that also helps you to estimate the market. And you are looking at it, if it is localized, it will not scale. Simple as that. So, to answer whether this is a problem worth solving, you ask yourself whether fixing this specific sort of a problem or inefficiency, whether it directly improves patient outcomes, which is basically patient mortality, morbidity, or discharge velocity, for example. So, is the impact that it has on these metrics, is it even worth the time and effort? I'll give you an example from my own background: fracture fixation, right? So, most of us know that when you're trying to reduce fractures during surgery, you need 60% of contact. That's it. The rest of it, nature does. Now, when you go from 60 to 100, there is very little impact on fracture union. But there is a very sort of a steep rise in the risk of complications, because to achieve 100% reduction, you'll need to expose the fracture that much more, which means you're stripping soft tissue, you're destroying blood supply, you're increasing the time of the surgery, you're increasing risk of bleeding. So always that trade-off has to be apparent in your mind. Will this actually help if I do it this way? So that is something that we need to always keep in mind. And even after validating, now let's say we've already standardized it, we have validated it. Now, what do? We still need a buy in from a potential customer. And the easiest customer here would be the hospital administration where we're working in. Now, can a non clinical hospital administrator can they quantify the exact revenue lost due to this broken workflow? Because if they cannot price the problem, they will not buy the solution. So we need to convert the patient outcome metrics into tangible financial metrics that they because that's a language they understand. And once you convey to them that doing X will result in this kind of an outcome for the patient and this kind of an outcome for the hospital, they will be more likely to get behind the solution. And we have this habit, we speak in morbidity, mortality, but they usually speak in terms of EBITDA, revenue leakage, bed turnover velocity, liability metrics. So we need to translate these outcomes into numbers to gain buy. So if you go back to the first example, this was regarding the discharge delays. That's faster bed turnover, right? And that is something that any kind of an administrator can understand, and they can actually get behind and support that kind of an initiative. Now, this is a very important point, right? Isolating a single problem. If you try to fix the entire ward at once, that causes scope creep, and that will kill several early stage companies. Many, in fact, if you try to solve too many problems, if you try to help too many stakeholders, it's not going to work. So we must define exactly one stakeholder, one specific point of friction, what is the financial imperative to solve this, and the exact measure that proves that the solution works. And again, back to the sort of a question, who will pay for this? Now, see, if you look at where we are right now, Indian healthcare, the payers, the providers, the end users, and the beneficiaries are often different people. And when you're trying to sort of position the product, you may have to go with a different approach to each of these stakeholders. And often you have to highlight different aspects. For example, to a doctor, you would highlight any kind of an impact in actual terms of patient outcomes. But to an administrator, it may be in financial terms. So if you go and so going on to the next section. Now you have your idea, it's validated. What do you do next? Now, one thing we realize is as we progress through our medical training and practice, our social circles rarely include software architects, AI experts, or product manager, or even some sort of a venture builder. So to break this isolation, doctors must step into deliberate crossing points, something like what we are right now in MAMC's MIC. So this is a node you can sort of interact with engineers, you can interact with product managers, business persons, as well as doctors. Or you have several such initiatives across India. One of the best ones come to mind is something like the IIT Bombay's TIH Foundation or JJ Hospital's Mice Labs. They exist specifically for cross-disciplinary collision. Engineers in these places, they have all the technical tools and they are hungry for validated problems. Doctors bring in domain authority and ground truth. So, and at that time, it is something that you also need to look at. See, as a doctor, you must also decide what is your level of involvement in building the solution. And this is a very personal choice for each of us. See, one can be a clinical validator. In that, you have an advisory role only. So, for example, you have a very busy practice and you don't have time. So you commit only 1 or 2 hours a week where you look at what is the ongoing progress, whether it sort of fits into the workflow that you're trying to solve. And there you're mainly aiming at course correction and advisory. So that is what we call as a clinical validator. You can also be the co-architect where you're actively co-building with the tech team. So you take care of the medical parts, the tech team takes care of all the rest of the and here your expertise will anchor the clinical specifications in real life use. And you will also be responsible for leading the hospital pilots. And here you can expect significant co-founder equity. You can expect ownership in that company. And of course, see, if you decide I've had enough of medicine and you want to lead this, doing this full time, that's on the table too. So shifting your focus from individual patient care to a systemic venture building, it can be extremely fulfilling in terms of scale of impact that one can make. And that is a path that I have chosen for myself. The other thing we need to remember is, see, we like with the administrators, so also with the engineers. There's a common adage that engineers often over optimize for edge cases. So if they see something which is like a very rare kind of a thing, they want to make a solution that solves even those edge cases. But what would doctors do? Doctors would triage it, right? They say that, okay, this is just an occasional blip and we don't want to go and over engineer a solution, raise our own costs, etc., etc. So clinicians and software developers, they usually speak sort of incompatible dialects. And so you need some translational partners like a venture studio or a specialized advisory firm like my own, for example. We basically absorb the operational friction, and we also help to structure the early equity. We vet the clinical talent, and we also help to translate the clinical workflows into languages that the engineers can understand. So this is one document which we call the CCD. So this is simply a clinical constraints document. I will go through everything step by step. I'll explain everything to you. So this is a crucial sort of a boundary setting exercise. Before even we start work, before even we kick off the project, right? You have to set the boundaries. So when we talk about the first point, defining false positive limits to prevent sort of alarm fatigue. So what are we doing is, see, we are going to define the acceptable rates of false alarms before any kind of a clinical staff will decide to ignore the system completely. Let's say you're in ICU, right? A lot of alarms are beeping all the time. Hmm? So it's something like the boy who cried wolf. How many times does the boy cry wolf before the villagers stop listening to him completely? So we should always aim to be below that limit. Otherwise, let's say you have the best sensors, let's say you have the best AI early warning systems in the ICU, but whatever alerts that you're getting, if it is not being picked up by the healthcare providers and acted upon, there's no point, right? So that is something we need to look at. And as doctors, we are trained to work with incomplete information. This is one of the hallmarks, what we normally do in the ER, for example. And we make rapid decisions to save lives in emergency situations. Now, just imagine a diagnostic model which requires about 4 to 6 minutes of computing time on the cloud. And this is to be deployed in the ER. This is a liability. It will not work. So that is where we have to decide. We have to specify the maximum inference time that we allow. So when I say dictate maximum inference latency, that's what I mean. How long before we need this result? And this has to be a sort of a replicable process over a large amount of data, over a large amount of what we call use cases and repetitions. And see, mandating frictionless integration. What I mean by this is hospital has already invested a lot of money in the HIS, in the hospital information system or the EMRs, right? If we have a solution which requires a different screen, or if it requires the doctor to switch to a different app or a different window, it's not going to work. It's as simple as that. So basically, as much as you can integrate with the existing hospital information system, that would help. And a standalone dashboard is something that is what we call as dead on arrival. It's as simple. And one more thing that we need to look at is when you design a hospital pilot, right? So instead of looking at the academic AUC scores, which is area under the curve, so whenever you put a pilot, you have some metrics where you'll see whether it has met its endpoints, whether it has made a difference, etc., etc. Always add some kind of an operational throughput, which means track how it improves operational efficiency. If you go back to the discharge example, you will be measuring the time to discharge or the turnaround time or the bed turnover rates. These are sort of insights which help the hospital administrators to decide whether they want to take this up or not. And this is something you can always position that, this is something that is going to give you some tangible return on investment straight away. And now again, back to the main question, who will pay for this? So algorithms which are optimized solely for research papers, let's say you're doing this as a science project, they will not work in production. So building an algorithm without an interested buyer, it traps the venture in endless pre-hospital trials. So That is what I meant by saying that whenever we run a pilot, we need to have some operational metrics. So just basically, when you look at certain endpoints, for example, revenue protection or bed turnover, this will differentiate a nice to have science project from an essential project that people will pay for. So in marketing, during my management journey, marketing for many of us, right? Marketing means sales, means branding, but it's not. It's not just that. Marketing begins even before you make the product. So if you remember the few questions we asked initially, is this large enough of a problem? Do other hospitals face it? We are doing marketing. We are looking at who is our end user, or rather who has this problem too and might consider paying for this. So that kind of a marketing mindset is very important to have right from the design stage. So if I want to sum up this section, look at it: audit your bandwidth, decide your stance early, whether you want to be a validator, a co-architect, or a venture leader. And this way you can set expectations even before assigning any equity. Build your team. So go into a dedicated medtech incubator like MAMC's Mice Labs at JJ Hospitals or TIHIIT, and there are a bunch of others. We are trying to come up with a directive for the government of Karnataka, but more on that later. And go in with a written problem statement. Don't go in with a casual verbal pitch. Give it some thought. Draft your CCD first. So define your sort of operational requirements and constraints, and then always look at utilizing a transaction. Always look at using some kind of a translation buffer. The reason for that is, see, unless you are leaving your clinical practice completely, or you have loads of time, or you have a large team, it's always very, very difficult for a active clinician to remain involved in product development. So that is where your translation buffers will help. Always measure sort of operational throughputs during your pilots. So design your validation pilots around all those metrics that matter to the hospital administration. Moving on to the next section. So here, one of the ways that we look at when we say who will pay for this. So paying for developing a product versus paying for the actual product itself. So when you're looking at, should I put my own money into this? You may not need to. Luckily for us, we are at a time in India, grant is wide open for many of these ideas. However, even before we look at that, we need to look at a few things. For example, the micro environment in which we're working in. So, if you're an employee of a hospital, let's say a government hospital or a teaching hospital, and there you need to remember, as an employee, you may not have uh, rights to the intellectual property, or you may have to share it with your hospital. So, an employed doctor writing code or capturing data during hospital hours will face institutional copyright claims. So, they usually have a tech transfer office. Talk to them and look at whether you can sort of draft an agreement early. How do you share out your intellectual property? Because there's no point otherwise. See, you work so much on a specific solution, and then once it is validated, once it is in the market, your institution comes and takes it away from you. So that's not a situation you want to be in. And the other thing is your workforce bandwidth. So a senior doctor or a senior clinician may not have the bandwidth to manage any kind of institutional paperwork. So the easiest workaround is drafting your research fellows, your residents, or your junior faculty, and who may have a little bit more time. So they can be the operational co-leads, or they can be the what we call as the operational champions. So they would be helping to drive the day-to-day pilot execution under your senior advisory guidance. And like I already said earlier, a legacy HIS integration. The primary point of institutional death is hospital information system. So if an AI tool, again I'll say this, if an AI tool requires a doctor to open a second browser window or a separate login, adoption will be zero. The other question you need to look at is the macro environment. We've already seen the micro environment, now the macro environment. Who are you building for? So remember, we live in two countries. Tier 1, we call it India, but it has 70% of specialist doctors, while over 70% of our population lives in tier 2, 3, and 4. We'll call that Bharat. So if you're selling to India, the focus is more on marginal efficiencies, bed turnover velocity, liability mitigation for corporate hospitals. However, if you're building for Bharat, So there you need to look at what kind of resources are already available. So that demands non-specialist clinical support, a triage at the PHC level, edge computing, and offline first architectures. If you're saying that many of my sort of inputs or all these things require a very stable internet connection, you may have to rethink whether you can even approach a tier 3 or a tier 4, because though what we take for granted in the cities is not true for the majority of India. So that is something we need to keep in mind. So if you're aiming to deploy clinical AI at a national scale, that will require some alignment with the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, the ABDM. Whatever solutions we create, they have to integrate with the ABHA IDs, which is the Ayushman Bharat Health Account, ABHA. And they have something called as a Unified Health Interface, or a UHI. What it means is, see, so far, all the data has been in silos. So each hospital, whether you go to any kind of a Fortis or an Apollo, they have their own HIS, they have their own data. You go from one hospital to the other, the new hospital cannot access the old data. So the government with the workaround, which is called as the Unified Health Interface. This mandates interoperability. It's something like you can actually think of it like UPI. You can do you can use the UHI to make appointments, to share your records, to give your consents, all those things. So whatever kind of a solution we're building, if our target market is Bharat, we need to consider ABDM. Again, for this. So if you go to a hospital, they may a month-on-month subscription model, which is tied to bed velocity. But if you're going to sell, they will rely on government schemes and incentives. And always remember, if you design a complex tool that relies on inputs like CT, sort of MRI data, or very sort of expensive or rarely available investigations, you may not find many takers at the PHC level or in any kind of a resource constrained area. So this is the non-dilutive capital ladder. When we say non-dilutive, what it means is these are grants. Simple. You get this money, not exactly for free, but you get this money from the government, from various other bodies, and here you don't have to give anything to them in return. This is basically seed money. Do not jump the ladder. Securing stage one and stage two will securing grants at stage one and stage two will de-risk your technical hypothesis, whatever you're working on, whether the tech solutions is up to scratch. So that is basically the role of stage one grants and stage two grants. So using that early data from stage one and stage two will help you to secure a stage three and stage four grants. And stage three and stage four are basically to de-risk your clinical and your regulatory pathways. So for example, tied or this will help you uh, this will let you stipend of 3,000 rupees a month, and it can be up to 4 lakhs. This will help you to give your time so that you don't have to go and work somewhere else. It's not very, very high amount, but it's basically sustenance income so that you can devote your time to solving the solution, to solving the problem. And once you have defined the problem, you use Nidhi Prayas to build the initial prototype, which is your stage two. Then you can go ahead and look at the of the grants. Do not approach high nodal grants like until you have some operational data, and you should have a functional MVP. What we mean by an MVP is a minimum viable product. So something that you could ship today to the customers outside. That is called as an MVP. It doesn't have to be a final product, but a working sort of a model which would solve the problem that you're looking to solve. So if you go chronologically through these non-dilutive grant nodes in order to de-risk your technology, the main thing is you don't have to give away equity in your company, so you avoid early equity dilution. So apart from that grant ladder, there are other grants too. So these are what we call as thematic grants or opportunistic grants. These are from the state governments, like the Karnataka state or the Telangana T Fund. Many CS organizations like the ACT grant Medical Innovation Foundation, etc., and even ICMR, which have disease for TB, for example. All of these can be a source of additional. So, yeah, so this slide is a very dense slide. This I'll like to share this if you want this later on. Don't spend too much time here. It's most of what we discussed. So, if I second on day zero, secure uh, from your tech team, from your execution, so that you know if you're going to build it is worth it. Draft optional things like your fellows, residents, or colleagues to run daily pilot operations. So, into clinical practice. Define your market segment. How are you building for? Choose whether you're building for India or Bharat and design your compute requirements basically accordingly to your customer. And look at embedding into ABDM. Ensure your software architecture will comply with the National Digital Health Standards and the Aadhaar data exchange formats from the start itself. And follow the capital ladder. So, sequence grant applications from EIR to Prayas, Startup India Seed Fund Scheme, and finally the BIRAC Big Grant. Avoid jumping straight to high ticket grants without a defensible proof concept. So I have to divide this into. So if you look at the anchor, we are taught about medical ethics, right? So whenever we are building any solution here, we must evaluate it against the four principles of biomedical ethics. So one of the best books I read was Beauchamp and Childress's Biomedical Ethics. So if you have time, go back. That is where they propose these four pillars. Most important in this case, so respecting your patient's choices. The patient retains the absolute right to reject any kind of AI intervention or algorithmic intervention. And if he wants, he can rely solely on human clinical judgment. That decision needs to be with the patient. So that consent has to be taken. Beneficiaries or acting in the best interest of the patient. So the tool, whatever we're building, whatever solution you're building, it must measurably improve patient outcomes and not just the billing efficiency. Non-maleficence, which is basically avoiding harm. So if you remember our oath that we all take, Hippocratic oath, primum non nocere, first do no harm. So that is non-maleficence. So if you deploy a black box model without understanding how it reasons, how it gets to the answer, and what are the limits, this will violate the duty of do no harm. Justice, which is basically equitable access. So if I train an algorithm on, let's say, data only from Delhi, and I want to deploy it in a place like Darbhanga, for example, I may not be getting very, very accurate answers because this can actually create something we call as algorithmic bias. And then there's one test that I always love to use, and this can be something like a moral compass. So it's called as the grandmother test. Before analyzing or before going into the CDSCO or any kind of other metrics, look at this. Would you trust this specific algorithm to make a crucial diagnostic or a treatment decision for your own grandmother? If you hesitate even one bit, that code is not ready yet. You need to go back and work on it some more. And of course, we all know about the ultimate patient welfare will sit on the registered medical practitioner. MAMC does not grant medical licenses to software. So at the end of the day, liability is ours. So we need to tread carefully in these cases. If you look at the regulatory grid, or rather the laws that are going to be sort of applicable here, CDSCO, of course. So it classifies software. The mechanism of classification, whether it's a class A, B, C, D, is based on the risk of harm if things go wrong. A tool which is for patient scheduling, for example, there's no major problem or a risk of harm if it goes wrong. Right? So it is almost unregulated. But if you have an algorithm that dictates an exit, that is straight away class C or class D, depending on where you're trying to use it. And here, as you go from class A to class D, the level of regulatory scrutiny increases and the kind of evidence that you need to and present. Second one is the NDC rules. This is the new drug and clinical trials rules of 2019. So they also apply clinical trials to simulated data is just not enough to deploy on live patients. If you're planning to deploy something which is a class C or a class D, use respective multi-center trials. So that is the main thing there. Kind of one thing we need to be really aware of. It has already started. So the DP Act has already started being implemented in phases. So earlier we could take the data from the hospitals, we could scrape it, we could do everything. But in today's world, that era is over. So training any models requires explicit patient consent, or the other workaround here is you need to make sure it is truly and irreversibly anonymized. What we mean by that is any patient data before it leaves the hospital's right, it has to be stripped of any kind of identifiers. So think names, think UHIDs, think sort of sexes, family history. All those things may have to be irreversibly anonymized even before you send the data out, or you get the consent from the patient, right? So data privacy is a statutory requirement right now, and there are severe financial penalties for this if we don't follow this. So this is something we all need to know. Let's look at a sort of a practical example, right? So there are a bunch of unanswered questions when you look at liability. So let's say we have an AI tool and that is at work in an ICU. It has seen the vitals, it has seen a few things, and it has arrived at a recommendation of starting a particular drug. In this case, we are looking at piperacillin and tazobactam. So the physician looks at it. He's stressed. He has multiple patients under him. It's the end of a long shift. And he has previously checked the AI's results, and he knows the AI is quite accurate, maybe in the 95-98% range. So he approves the result without actually checking the allergy module. What happens is the patient gets a severe allergy, goes into anaphylaxis. What is the outcome here? The algorithm cannot assume any kind of fiduciary duty. So in this case, logically speaking, the doctor will absorb the entire liability. We like to call this as a sponge for liability for any kind of a medical negligence action. But there are there are actually certain specific questions and considerations here. So in the future, if a doctor overrides the AI and he's wrong, they may face negligence claims. But if they blindly follow the AI and AI is wrong, they will still face negligence claims for abdicating the clinical judgment. So it's a case of damned if you do, damned if you don't, or something like a Hobson's choice. What is the choice there? So, however, the holding a doctor liable for a black box AI failure is a legal gray area. A doctor or any kind of a healthcare worker, you we are not trained to we are not trained in AI. We are not trained to assess what kind of training of AI has been done, what kind of weights has been given to a multi-layered network, and this is not in my domain of expertise. And plus, let's say I was not even involved in the designing of this tool, then it would be sort of against the principles of natural justice to hold me liable for a tool in which I had no role in creating. How it came to that answer, I can't explain. So the courts may actually pierce the human in the loop defense. So when we say human in the loop, this is one of the sort of ICMR's words where they say any kind of a software or AI which is working in healthcare has to be sort of under the control of a doctor or a healthcare worker, where they can look at the recommendations, they have the ability to override the recommendations, etc., etc. So the idea is to have a buffer or a safety net in the form of a human in the loop. So there you can obviously see those problems there. If there's a human in the loop and he's not able to understand how the AI got the answer, he may check once or twice, he may go on to Google, check the literature, use his textbooks, etc. But will he do that every single time? No. So that is what we call as automation bias. Because of automation bias, there's a problem with the human in the loop defense. So this is something that the courts may not accept. So this is a gray area. The second problem is, okay, now let's say it's an AI, it's made by the developer. Let's sue the developer. However, see, if you look at the legal aspects of product liability. We're talking about product liability. It's a product, right? Let's say I'm a manufacturer of a medical device and I ship it to the hospital. There's a manufacturing defect in the medical device. It causes active patient harm. Patient sues the hospital, hospital sues me, or they make me a party to the case. And I am answerable. It's a medical device, right? What happens with AI? The AI I shipped is no longer the AI that is being used because AI is self learning. And you're looking at a model which has been trained on the local hospital's data. So what I shipped is basically fundamentally different from the AI which is at fault. So I'm also not liable as a developer, right? So these are the nuances that have not been answered yet. Hopefully, I shouldn't say hopefully, but so far we have not had a test case in our courts. Once we do, maybe we have answers on all these. So one of the middle paths proposed by the ICMR is something we call as calibrated liability. So they sort of fix some amount of liability on all the parties. That's the easiest way out. And there are a few other questions, like I already spoke about automation bias. There has to be an answer to how to prevent de-skilling. I'm sure many of us are aware. There are sort of there are a lot of articles going around as well. As AI gets used more and more, I'm not talking just about medicine, any other aspect. As we use AI more and more, we start to become less skilled. And there's a clear, there are multiple papers, there's a mounting body of evidence showing this. So this is still an open question. So whatever tools we ship, we have to also look at, is this going to be a concern for us? Because imagine a workforce that is no longer skilled enough to detect the origin, to detect whether this is a problem or not. That is something later on that can lead to more liabilities for developer. So what do we say at Avinya? Don't think about compliance as a burden. It is a moat. When I say moat, it is something like a competitive advantage because regulatory alignment is a barrier to entry. Your competitors may not be easily able to replicate your legally compliant, your ethically validated product. So from day one, look at how I can do this better instead of sort of sidestepping or avoiding it. More importantly, governance will drive your fundability. So if you're looking to raise capital later on beyond the grants, usually, on paper, they ignore any kind of rogue innovators. Strong ethical grounding, strict adherence to all the legal provisions. This will greatly impact your own valuation of your company and the kind of funds you'll receive. There's an adage in the Silicon Valley, moving fast and breaking things. So that may work for consumer software, but moving fast and breaking things in healthcare can be a disaster. So that is something we need to avoid. So I'll quickly sort of sum up this section. Do not transmit any raw data to external servers. Deploy some kind of a local solution. It could be a script. It could be uh, uh, some kind of an anonymization platform. It can sort of irreversibly remove all kinds of protected health information at the hospital server itself. So only de-identified data should ever leave the. Determine your CCO classification on day one itself. So you calculate how much you to get your clinical validation before you seek any kind of venture capital. Document right. So like I said, you know what in the loop find use cases that force clinicians or doctors or nurses to document their clinical rationale if they choose to override whatever recommendation the AI has. So create a defensible sort of an audit trail. It'll help you in court later. Build for trust, not speed. This is the most important point in healthcare. You treat regulatory compliance as a strategic mode and prioritize clinical safety and robust governance over rapid feature deployment. Let others rush, don't worry. Most important, what we always tell any kind of an AI developer is if you lose the trust, right, it spoils the entire ecosystem. And in healthcare, trust is paramount. So go slow, go steady at every stage. Always question your assumptions. Do not be in a rush. And finally, if I look at the future, for example, I have a wish list. So if I were to give you my wish list or my focus areas for AI in healthcare, the first and foremost would be minimizing any kind of administrative friction. the most boring part of our jobs, right? Writing down notes, whether it's OT notes, ward notes, any kind of sort of prescriptions. If I have to sit and type a long case summary or a discharge summary, that is something that's a waste of my time, right? Many times I have sat down and looked at what I'm doing, and I realized I did not need to be trained for 12 plus years to do this job. So there is a growing sort of an awareness that we are misutilizing our most highly trained assets. So doctors or nurses, for that matter, they actually go through a very rigorous training. You want them to sit and type out notes. That is a waste of their time. The best use of their time would be either doing surgeries or active patient care. And most hospitals are starting to recognize this. So the best part about minimizing this administrative friction is it has the lowest regulatory barrier and the highest immediate return on investment. So immediate use cases, like I already mentioned, clinical notes, automated discharge summaries, sort of intelligent billing coding. So this will solve massive hospital bottlenecks and will not trigger any kind of compliance burden because you're not doing any kind of patient care directly. The next would be something like a clinical orchestration and the clinical decision support system. So CDSS is the clinical decision support system. We call it a co-pilot for doctors. So just think about it like this. You have an ambient AI in your OPD. It listens while you're talking to your patient. You're talking to your patient, you're having a conversation with eye contact. Simultaneously, the AI is listening to everything and it is giving you structured notes on your screen. Screen is at eye level. It's like a heads up display. You maintain your eye contact, and over here you have specific questions which the AI is telling you, do not miss this question because this could be the differential diagnosis. And it also tells you ways to narrow down the list. Ask this question, then we can eliminate this option. Do this investigation at the end so that you from the list you can narrow it down further. Now this is simply diagnostic. It is not prescribing anything, it's not recommending any treatment, it is just helping you think better, right? So this is something that can be a real game changer. And but why don't we see more of it today? So there is a caveat. Deploying this in an Indian OPD is difficult. There is very high background noise, multiple simultaneous speakers, and multiple dialects. Every 200 kilometers, your language changes. So these are each their own problem statements. And once we sort of figure out all these solutions, probably this is something that can be rolled out in a big way. Now, one more reason why we are saying OPD first CDSS versus a CDSS with treatment recommendations, like I said, is a regulatory requirement. So diagnostic AI is defensible. Prescriptive AI is a legal gray area. The NMC, the ICMR do not allow any kind of autonomous or quasi-autonomous AIs. So remember that. And under CDSCO guidelines, any software driving direct treatment decisions automatically triggers a Class C or a Class D scrutiny. It doesn't matter if you add fine print disclaimers. This is not medical advice. You please speak to your doctor. That will not give you any kind of a legal shield if things go wrong. I'm sure many of us have heard of this concept called as a digital twin, right? So I'll just expand into that a little bit. The original promise of the digital twin concept was, see, we we take all the data about one person, genomics, we'll not just say genomics, it's going to be multi-omics, right? Genomics, transcriptomics, exomes, every single thing that you can get, all your lab tests, all your protein data, all your vitals, all your past history, your family history, everything. Now, let's say you feed that into a model. So that becomes your digital twin. The idea was, if I age the digital twin artificially, I can see what diseases, I can predict what diseases you're going to get with a very high degree of probability, right? And I can also try virtual treatments on the digital twin so that I see which treatment works best for you. And that is the very definition of what we call as personalized medicine. However, that reality is at least a decade away. The so-called digital twins that you're seeing in the market nowadays, they are just 3D anatomical models or they're biometric trackers. If somebody claims to you with certainty, right, it's snake oil, as simple as that. We are not there yet. We are all working towards it. And but just imagine if you have a single thread and you're trying to read the entire sort of a picture of your painting or the pattern, you are bound to make mistakes. Whatever kind of uh, sort of recommendations or predictions you make are likely not to be that accurate. Finally, this is also one area where I'm very excited about the potential for AI. AR or VR based anatomy simulators, surgical simulators. So here, if you look at it, the patient risk has suddenly dropped to zero. Earlier, what was happening in our training during our residencies, you basically scrub into your cases in the OT. There's a senior surgeon. He probably lets you do a few things, lets you suture, etc., etc. As time goes by, slowly, slowly, you start to climb up the ladder and you start to do the cases yourself. But if you can use this technology, you can democratize access not just for residents, not just for students, but also for surgeons. Let's say you have a rare condition or you have a new surgical technique or some kind of a complex anatomical variation. This will allow the people who don't encounter these cases also to work on it, right? Many airlines, many sort of flight schools make it mandatory for those who are training to be pilots to log hours in flight simulators. So this is something like a surgical simulator for us, so that we are much more better at our jobs and it's best for patient safety. So this has the potential to solve the ethical dilemma that we always face about the steep learning curve. Yeah. So I think I've overshot my time a little bit. So that was it, everybody. Thank you so much. You've been a very patient audience. I'm open to any questions. If you want to connect directly, also you can drop me an email.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiran. Lots of questions indeed. And first of all, just wanted to acknowledge what a wonderful session today. Especially valuable was the point that it's not about just the total number of topics that you covered, but clearly how you connected them into one practical journey from the starting question. And the most important, I echo, is are we even solving the real problem and the right problem? And from there, you took us to what happens next, validating whether the problem matters beyond one hospital or understanding who the real user or buyer was, deciding how the clinicians and engineers can work together, what the technology must actually do in the real clinical setting. Especially love the part of the grandmother test, indeed. And also thinking about the fundings, the regulations, ethics, liability, scale, and so on and so forth. Thank you so much for that very crisp discussion on it. Certainly, from wards to the workflows. Sounds like a very brief and crisp update on that. Thank you so much. Several questions are coming around over here, indeed, including the human in the loop, the recent important but a buzzword responsibility, the human in the loop responsibility, or the disclosure, or the informed consent, privacy and liability. Multiple questions are coming up. I would just summarize, since the level of oversight will depend on the clinical risk and how much the AI actually influences the decision. How should we think about the right level of human oversight in different situations? That would answer multiple questions together. Over.
Yeah. See, basically, if you look at, I mean, when I saw this specific phrase, human in the loop, in the ICMR's ethical guidelines, even I was very confused and surprised, because what I felt is AI promises to increase the reach, increase the scale of our healthcare solutions, right? The biggest bottleneck as we see it nowadays is lack of trained healthcare personnel in tier 2, 3, 4, etc. So, what if you replace them with AI? That was the premise of AI. But the moment you human in the loop, that premise is gone, because now you need a trained person, you need a trained doctor who will be sitting over there. So your velocity or your scale goes down. You can't go ahead with those things. But then I thought about it and I realized, see, like I said earlier, trust is the most important component of healthcare. How do you build trust? You make sure there is somebody who is trained to look at the solutions, understand whether this output that the AI is giving me, whether this kind of a, let's say it is some kind of a screening test and it has given me a result that this could be a possible cancer. How much of confidence I have in that, I would be able to go back and look at how did it arrive at the answer. Take out the raw data, take out the screening test itself. I should be able to look at that and see, okay, yeah, this is fair, this is a good answer. Let us proceed with a sort of confirmatory test, maybe. So the idea of a human in the loop is basically to avoid any kind of hallucinations from the AI, basically to avoid patient harm. And there is also a practical reason for that. Like I said earlier, you can't sue AI. You can't hold AI liable. You can't hold AI responsible. but you can hold a human responsible. So the main sort of a caveat there is who takes ownership of whatever result or a solution comes out of AI. So for that, you need a human in the loop. So it is a double-edged sword for doctors as well. As we go forward, as we start to see more and more sort of a deployment of AI, we need to be well versed. How did this AI reach this? No black box. It has to actually show the steps that it took from, let's say, a symptom. It used this symptom, this part of history, this investigation to reach this diagnosis. So that pathway, that chain of reasoning has to be very, very clear. So we as doctors have to start understanding how an AI makes the decision. Otherwise, like I said earlier, it'll just be a rubber stamping. AI है उसको पता होगा बस that's it. So that should not be the case. I hope I've answered it adequately, but if there are more questions, I'm glad to take this offline if somebody is on the same topic. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Kiran. In fact, we had discussed briefly a bit more in detail about the privacy and the accountability issues in our previous sessions as well. But certainly these questions are very important and has to be repeated unless they are actually solved in real world. So I would thank the audience actually to bring those important questions for sure. And thank you so much, Dr. Kiran, for your answer. One more question which is coming up is very common is about. Yes, we agree that the AI models have been improving significantly and very rapidly. But errors and the over trust remain concerns. How much has this entire clinical reliability genuinely improved over the last 2, 3 years, as per your understandings? And looking ahead now, we are rapidly so moving fast. Billions of dollars are being invested 3 to 5 years ahead. Will accuracy itself be the main bottleneck? Or whatever we discussed today for in detail about the workflow integration, trust, regulation, accountability, sustainability, will that become more important? And what will still remain the hype?
See, in my mind, both are equally important, but accuracy, there is a very easy way to solve accuracy. You give more data for training, right? The larger the data sets that you train your models on, the better the accuracy. I have personally seen models which are around 98, 99% accurate, and they're trained on millions of data sets. As a doctor, as a human rather, can I even match the accuracy levels? No. Or maybe not consistently. On my best days, probably. But on my worst days, I'll be around 50%, right? If I had a bad day, I woke up, you know. So as a human, I go through sort of ups and downs. And AI may not have that kind of a failing or a weakness. So I think this is something that we are going to look at in the sense accuracy will not be an issue in the future. The more data you train it on, the more accurate it will become. But trust, but compliance, but ethics, those are the barriers which need a different approach. Going slow, checking everything, presenting your findings, getting buy-in. So they are building trust is far more important than accuracy. That is my opinion. Of course, accuracy is important, but remember the average human doctor's accuracy is around the 70% mark. AI is already past 95, 98%, right? So if you're saying accuracy, 100% accuracy doesn't exist and will never exist.
Thank you so much. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much for that answer. Certainly, we are being as early adopters, and I won't say early adopters anymore. I used to say this in 2023 or 2022. Perhaps right now we are on-time adopters, and certainly we have to have some kind of skepticism whenever we are utilizing AI, and that answer would lead to all these conversations further. So thank you so much for that best way put of answer. There's one more question. You describe clinicians as validators, co-architects, or venture leaders. For a just to cover all the people on the call right now, for a medical student or a young doctor who wants to, or a young nurse in a rural tribal area, for instance, wants to contribute to clinical AI, even without coding skills. Of course, that's not expected from healthcare folks. We would know more about those medical jargons, but not the codings. But what is the most important realistic first step? Are there some roles or job opportunities actually emerging in India that you are seeing, including remote work? How do people actually realistically see the way forward? And it's fine if we don't answer like in a detailed specific word, but just your broad perspectives around this question. Over.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you for the great question. This is something that many of us have grappled with. See, as a doctor or as a nurse or a healthcare worker, all of us are overworked. That is the ground state, right? In case you want to lead this along with your sort of main career or your usual sort of medical or healthcare provider career, it is not going to be possible to do both. So that is where you need to pick. If you still want to be involved, you can be there as an advisor, as a validator. That's fine, because there you are basically allocating 1 to 2 hours per week of your time, and you're using your own expertise, your own experiences to see whether this solution may work or not, right? But if you want to become something like a co-founder, or you want to lead the company yourself, that means giving up medicine. Unfortunately, that is the sort of reality of that. Medicine in India is a 24/7, 365 job. It's more than a job, it becomes your identity, right? You never stop being a doctor, no matter where you go in India. So that is something that will not allow you to take on other roles, or rather, it's not easy to take on other roles. So for a young doctor, that kind of a decision has to be made. And see, you need not make that decision once and stick to it. Your priorities can change. You can start off with an advisor, look at how it is going. If it is very, very sort of interesting, or it is something that you feel has a lot of potential, you can always choose later on to switch into becoming a co-founder. So these are options, and these are journeys. Again, like I said, it's a very, very personal question that each of us has to answer for ourselves, depending on what we want out of it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiran, for yet another answer. Very, very well put. Since we have limited time right now and it's 5 minutes ahead of our schedule, we will wrap up in the next couple of minutes. But just, I think the one message that came through very repeatedly was that a good algorithm is not automatically a good healthcare innovation. It still has to fit in the workflow. It still has to solve a problem that actually matters. The clinicians have to trust it, trust being the most important. It was repeatedly emphasized by Dr. Kiran. Patients have to be protected, someone has to sustain it, and ultimately it has to be making the healthcare better, safer, or even faster, at the end of it more accessible, thinking of the last mile. For our students, who is on the call, I think there's an especially important takeaway. You do not have to begin knowing how to make an AI model, start a company, or understand every small regulation. You can begin much, much, much earlier, as we learned from Dr. Kiran, by simply becoming very good at noticing problems. And that feels like a very fitting point at which I would call it as, with wholeheartedly, the close to our MIC's webinar series 1.0. And across the series, we actually have spent time learning about innovation, technology, and artificial intelligence. I would highly recommend, because many of the questions that were coming up have been at least partially covered in our previous sessions. And those were very interesting discussion that we had with other speakers with whom we had the privilege to have a talk with. I have already shared the link in the chat box, but I'll just request our colleague and our team to share it again in the chat box for you so that you can have a look at it. It's on our official website as well, all the repositories of previous webinar sessions. However, with that note, I would say that the next step right now from this discussions, with a wonderful ending on today's sessions, is to move from listening to doing. And so perhaps the simplest challenge for everyone, at least on the behalf of our team, is here that notice one problem around you, write it down clearly, ask who experiences it, or how they manage it today, and what would actually improve if it was solved, and then speak to someone else from another discipline, as Dr. Kiran was mentioning about. And then a single conversation between a clinicians, an engineer, a researcher, or a tech person, entrepreneur, may be the beginning of something very useful. Dr. Kiran, thank you so much again for giving us a thoughtful and a practical conclusion to this first series of MIC at Maulana Azad Medical College, and for sharing your experiences so generously. And to everyone who has been a part of this entire series for the entire 1 year, every month, the workshops that we had done, and even the virtual ones, in person ones, thank you so much. It's really a privilege and an honor to have you engaged in this wonderful journey of AI. And people have been discussing the worries. Very interesting people have been saying about how many people are actually working on AI safety and how many people are actually working aggressively on just the benefits part of it. The ratio is skewed. We have to think about all the points what Dr. Kiran has referred to us about. And hopefully, Series 2.0 that we are looking forward to have can be the next step from webinars that we are conducting to problems, from problems to making teams, and from teams to actually building real world solutions. We are looking forward to have that as the most focused area. So we will request you to stay engaged. We will be sharing our details as well over emails. You have already registered with us, so thank you for that. For more questions, we will be grateful to have Dr. Kiran around with us as well. It's our privilege, Dr. Kiran. Thank you so much. And in case you have any questions, he has already shared his contact details. So please feel free to reach out. I again emphasizing the same. And I'll take a pause over here just for any last thoughts. We have Dr. Anurag as well with us, who has been a founding person at Maulana Azad Medical College Medical Innovation Center. Since it's the end of the series one, Dr. Anurag, just wondering if it is possible for you to share some very quick few words. Over to you.
Yeah, hi, Priyansh. Thank you for this, and thank you, Dr. Kiran. It was amazing listening to you. And yes, it has been a year-long journey. We started this last year in August, and September was the first webinar we did, and this is 12th in the series. And over the series, we have covered various aspects of AI from the prism of medical doctors. And we have tried to kept it very, low tech language so that we understand and we are able to use these. And thank you for everyone for attending. And very soon we'll be coming out with another theme for maybe next round of webinars or some activities which will bolster the innovation circuit in India, as Dr. Kiran was also saying that it should be for Bharat. And so we'll continue working towards that. Thank you, everyone, for your support.
All right, just ending with a housekeeping update. We will be sharing post-test form with you, which will be helpful for us for the certification purpose. But couldn't have ended this entire discussion better. Thank you so much, Dr. Anurag, for your end note. And again, once again, Dr. Kiran, thank you so much for your time. And audience, the wonderful audience who have put so many important questions. Yes, this is human. This is all these conversations are human. This is most important thing right now. What we are discussing, this cannot be replaced by AI. Whatever we are discussing right now, the future direction of it, it's us who have to define it, and it's us who have to think through it. Thank you so much again, audience, for your wonderful time. Thank you so much, Dr. Kiran, again, and we will see you soon. We'll stay in touch with you on Gmail or Yahoo or wherever you are. We'll reach out to you for sure if you are already in touch with us. Thank you so much, and we'll close the session formally right now. Thank you.